How are you? Welcome back. Early start this morning. I'm in beautiful southwest Scotland today. Bit of a rush and I've forgotten the fluffy little heads from a microphone, so we're going to have to battle our way through some wind noise. But look, still learning here and we're just going to have to live and learn. Today I'm in southwest Scotland to talk to you about maize. But you didn't expect me to be in southwest Scotland to talk to you about maize. Just over 12 months ago I was speaking to our local agronomist in this area, Ali Neal, about the idea of growing maize on a wider scale than already is, and possibly in a bit of a different way. A date was set and I came up for a day and spoke to quite a few growers in the area about the opportunity and the options that they had to hand, but not looking at the traditional way that maize has been grown in these sorts of types of regions, utilising plastic and enhancing that heat units available to those maize. I was looking to actually achieve this by growing it conventionally and out in the open. Now, one of those farms that I came up to visit is actually where I am today. This is East Logan of the Yates family and Logan Holsteins. Speaking to Michael, discussing the options that we had available, especially with regards to newer ultra early genetics. Michael was keen to look at the option of growing maize to replace the starch source that they previously had as whole crop within their rotations. Now, Michael's unfortunately not well at the moment, taken to his bed with a sickness bug, which seems to be heading fairly rife throughout the region. So I've been keeping a bit of a distance from farms I've been to see today. So I don't think he'll mind me just filling in the gaps as to his thoughts behind it and the outcomes that we had throughout the last 12 months. Now, if you've seen my previous video talking about the maturity of maize varieties, you'll remember me talking about the advances in those ultra early genetics. Also, the weather patterns that we're starting to see, the differences in terms of climate. It was my belief that actually southwest Scotland is one of those regions that is starting to receive more favourable weather patterns throughout any growing season. Therefore, changing the options that we have available to us from what we've previously known and possibly already currently growing maize under in those circumstances. Now, traditionally, maize grown in these sorts of types of regions has always been established under plastic. Speaking to Michael, as I say, he was keen to look at different ways of producing starch and whether or not we could actually grow maize conventionally. This farm at East Logan here had actually grown maize up until around about 15 years ago, but with the use of plastic. Had there been changes since then? Has there been benefits that have been brought to the breeding programs and maize variety availability for the UK market that meant that looking at something different like establishing maize without plastic could actually be a really viable option? Now, in the grand scheme of things, me coming north of the border discussing maize being grown in the open, it's fairly outlandish as it is potentially. However, then discussing it in a year like we were given last year, even more so. Last year on record was probably one of, if not the worst years for growing maize the UK's seen for a very long time, if not a generation. But we decided we'd give it a go. But did it work? Now, the conversation of establishing maize under plastic or out in the open can be quite an emotive one. We won't be getting into that today. We're just going to be focusing on growing maize out in the open or conventionally as an option for these sorts of types of regions. First and foremost, if it is that we are looking to select a variety to be grown out in the open in very marginal regions such as this potentially, actually becomes quite simple. Your choices aren't that many. You're only ultra earlies. There's perhaps 6 to choose from. So that narrowed it down quite quickly in terms of what varieties we were looking at growing. When it comes to establishing any maize in any region, the first point of establishment is variety selection. As I say, when you're in these parts of the world, the choice isn't overly drastic. You only have probably a handful to choose from. Last year, Michael decided he wanted to try Lima Grange Gemma. So an FAO 150 ultra early that is well proven and a benchmark variety within that sector. Now, even though I do believe regions such as southwest Scotland are starting to have a bit of a change in their weather patterns, they weren't removed from the wet conditions of spring that we all received last year. The Gemma wasn't established until middle towards the end of May, and on ground that had traditionally been grass, but also up alongside the river. Not only did we want to select an early variety for harvest to maintain and achieve overall maximum quality and yield, but also from an environmental point of view, so that we knew that maize was harvested in good time especially in consideration to the river being up alongside us. The year that followed, of course, was the same year for us all. It was the one that had the record for least amount of heat units and daylight sunshine hours possible. It was a dark, dank, horrible year, and probably not the year that you would have, on reflection, decided to possibly try and grow maize conventionally out in the open in southwest Scotland. However, for a first year growing maize and a testing year for anyone growing maize, Michael did an incredible job. Supported by Alistair in terms of the inputs and the advice that the crop would require, the crop of Gemma got away to a brilliant start. Yes, all right, it wasn't a vintage year, but ultimately the crop was harvested early October and yielded 18 tonne to the acre, grown in the open, conventionally, without the use of plastic. In actual fact, a point that I mentioned about those different changes in weather were clear to see on the messages that these guys were sending me during harvest. They were harvesting in similar conditions as today, bright blue skies, there was dust. Whereas I was in fields south of the border in Shropshire and Cheshire with tractors bogged from the amount of rain that we'd received that these guys had just missed. I'm telling you, the world's upside down, I'm sure it is. But the story of establishing and harvesting a brilliant crop of maize in great time in one of the most challenging years between Michael and Alistair doesn't stop there. This is the field it was grown in. Not only did they establish, harvest a crop of maize in the open in a year like last year, they managed to establish a crop of forage rye behind it. Look at it. So by utilising those advances within those ultra early genetics, some of that performance that's possibly overlooked, we're able to achieve not only a crop of maize, but also a following crop of forage rye as well. As I've already mentioned, we're alongside the river. Another important part for Michael to ensure that we got this maize harvested in good time was to ensure that we had a crop established behind it to retain that soil nutrients and reduce the overall risk to the river if there was a wet winter following it. The fact that now we've got a significant lump of forage to be harvested this spring before maize goes back in again, well, it's just absolute testament to the pair of them. This crop of forage rye was again established under textbook format, just a light disking across the maize stubbles, just to aid that bit of establishment after a bit of wheelings across the ground. Ultimately, we've got a crop here that I think would rival any crop in the UK at the moment following maize. And again, just goes to point out that we really are in the land of milk and honey up here. Now, I don't think Alistair and Michael, either of them, will mind me telling you that around about a month ago, I received a phone call to say, are we sure this forage rye is worth keeping? It's only about ankle height, doesn't really look like it's going to do much. They had to trust me when I said, leave it, it will do its thing. It's going to do a significant amount of growth in the next 3 to 4 weeks, which it has. This crop has received around about 30 kilos of nitrogen, just as that little bit of a tickle. And again, you'll remember me discussing that handhold for this incredible amount of growth that it's clearly put on during those few weeks. So the 22nd of April, and the majority of this crop is around about waist height. It's going to be harvested in the next week to 10 days, that optimum stage, just as the ears are starting to show, to maximise not only yield, but also quality as well. Now for the coming season, as I say, this forage rye is due to be harvested in the next week to 10 days, so that'll get us towards the end of April, beginning of May. The plan is then just to repeat exactly what we did last year, just to be about 2 to 3 weeks ahead. Furthermore, we've actually upped the ante in terms of variety selection for this year. We've gone with a variety called K2S Lato. Doesn't take anything away from LG Gemma, the only difference being that it actually offers around about 10 days to a week extra maturity at the other end to an earlier harvest, hopefully buying us that little bit more time when it is that you become a very shorter time at the other end of the year. Now I know maize in southwest Scotland isn't anything new. Possibly growing it out in the open and conventionally without the aid of plastic is. As a business within this region, this is our largest growing region in terms of maize sales, up 300% this year on last year. That's telling us something. Things are changing. Growers are looking for other options, and they're finding those solutions in the advice that can be given. Now we're in the last week of April this year, and we're getting now finally to that point where we can start thinking about establishing this maize now that soil temperature is starting to get there and the weather is starting to improve from a temperature point of view. There will be many of you still that are possibly on the fence thinking about, could maize be an option for me in one of these more marginal parts of the UK? We've still got plenty of time. If it is that you are thinking about maize, wondered whether or not could it be achievable, use this as a barometer. Use this as an example that it can possibly be an option for you. Reach out, give me a call, drop me a line if it is that something that you think you want to be achieving and something that you want to have part of your rotation. Because as I say, I don't think you can paint the picture any clearer as to what the options can be, especially in the world that we live in now. The concept of growing maize out in the open and conventionally in such regions in southwest Scotland actually drew a bit of attention last year. So much so I was asked to actually give a seminar at AgriScot around the principles and the potential of growing maize in the open in the likes of Scotland and the borders in particular. Again, there's a lot of conversation around those varieties that are being established under plastic and the place for plastic. Like I say, I won't get into that because it can get quite emotive. All I can tell you is that with the varieties that are available to you, especially in that ultra early category, the weather patterns, the knowledge and the experience that we now have, it's clear to see that actually establishing maize out in the open in places such as southwest Scotland, it's a real option now. Now, I absolutely take my hat off to both Michael and Alistair for what they managed to achieve last year in such a challenging year. People often ask me, what is it that I enjoy about my job the most? It's things like this. It's setting that seed, which doesn't have to be a literal seed. It can just be a seed of thought. It can be a bit of advice. It could be looking at something slightly differently that ultimately relieves an outcome such as this. So in summary, I think it's fair to say that if we can grow maize in a region such as Castle Douglas in a year like last year, we should be able to grow it in pretty much any year out in the open and conventionally. Michael's father, Brian, was telling me earlier on, actually the performance of the cows has lifted, obviously since they started putting the maize in the ration. One of the first points that everyone starts reflecting on is just actually not so much performance of livestock in the first instance, just how well they look as soon as maize starts being entered into the ration. They get this glow, they get this shine, which then feeds into extra fertility and of course production. In many situations, going back to that original conversation that I had with Michael about what he was looking to achieve in terms of performance from forage within his herd of cows here at East Logan, comes back to that point about livestock being hardwired almost to these sorts of types of crops, to the likes of maize, to the likes of lucerne. That's genetically what they've been bred to perform from. If it is that we are missing a crop such as maize out of the diet and therefore the rotation, we're missing part of the puzzle piece in terms of their performance ability themselves. So there we have it. Maize grown out in the open conventionally in southwest Scotland during one of the hardest years to grow maize the UK's seen for a long time. Then followed by a crop of forage rye that will be harvested in the next week to 10 days before going back into maize again. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe and click that little bell. I'll see you for the next one. Bye for now. I could walk around these fields around here all day. What a place to be. But I really better be getting home. Bye guys.